Welcome, you've chosen to spend some quiet time here, drifting gently into the past. As you settle in, perhaps lying back, eyes growing heavier, let's take a slow journey to a world of whispering bamboo, the faint scent of incense, and the distant echo of a temple bell. Tonight, we'll wander through feudal Japan, a place where every gesture was measured, every silence held meaning, and where the lives of women unfolded quietly within the walls of wooden houses and under the watchful gaze of tradition. Their world was one of discipline and grace, of duty and devotion, of long hours filled with small, deliberate acts that gave structure to the day. For some, life was a pattern of endless chores and obedience. For others, it was the art of refinement, learning to move, speak, and even breathe in ways that reflected balance and serenity. As you listen, imagine the cool morning mist that clings to the mountains. Imagine the rhythmic sweep of a broom across tatami mats. And as we move gently through time, let your mind rest on the stillness of their days and the quiet strength that sustained them, bound by duty, silence, and silk. Imagine waking before sunrise, the pale light filtering through rice paper screens. The air inside your small home is cool and still. You hear the rustle of your husband preparing to leave, the soft clink of his armor, or perhaps the quiet swish of his robe as he steps onto the wooden veranda. Your day begins not with your own plans, but with the needs of others. In feudal Japan, a woman's life was often shaped entirely by the expectations of family, status, and obedience. From the moment she could walk, she was taught how to bow correctly, how to speak softly, how to move gracefully. Even the way she folded her hands or lowered her gaze carried meaning. Women in this era were expected to embody the three obediences, to obey their fathers in youth, their husbands in marriage, and their sons in widowhood. Independence was rare. Most women had little control over whom they married, what work they did, or even how they dressed. Yet within this web of expectations, they found ways to endure, and even to create small spaces of beauty. Daily life depended greatly on social class. If you were the wife of a samurai, your home was quiet but ordered, your role clearly defined. Your duty was to manage the household with dignity, to ensure the servants performed their tasks properly, and to uphold your husband's honor. Your mornings might begin with tending to the household altar, lighting incense, bowing 3 times, and offering rice or tea in reverence to the ancestors. You would then oversee meals, bowls of rice, pickled vegetables, and miso soup, all prepared with meticulous care. Meals were eaten in silence, the soft clicking of chopsticks the only sound. Speaking too freely, especially before your husband or his peers, was discouraged. Restraint was considered a virtue. If you were born to a farmer's family, your world was simpler, but also more physically demanding. You would wake before dawn to prepare food, care for the children, and labor in the fields. Your hands, rough from work, would mend clothing, haul water, and gather wood until the sun dipped below the horizon. At night, you might sit by the faint light of an oil lamp, weaving straw sandals or repairing tools, the hum of insects outside your only companion. It was a life without luxury, but not without rhythm. The seasons dictated everything. Planting, harvesting, preparing for winter. Each year repeated the same quiet cycle, giving the illusion of permanence even as time passed silently by. Marriage, too, was an arrangement made less for affection and more for social order. Among the samurai and noble classes, unions were strategic, binding families together in loyalty and status. A wife was expected to serve as a symbol of her husband's virtue. She was his reflection, serene, modest, and disciplined. If she brought dishonor, even by rumor, the shame could fall upon an entire household. In some regions, samurai wives learned basic swordsmanship, not for glory, but for defense. If her husband fell in battle, she was expected to protect the home, and if defeat was inevitable, to die with dignity. The act was seen not as tragedy, but as honor. Even in death, obedience was expected. The clothing of the time reflected the same duality of beauty and restraint. Layers of silk or cotton were chosen carefully, the colors subdued, the patterns elegant but not ostentatious. A woman's kimono told the world who she was, her age, her rank, even her marital status without a single word being spoken. Hair was bound tightly, often oiled, and arranged into complex shapes that took hours to maintain. A loose strand could be seen as carelessness. Education, when allowed, focused on refinement, poetry, calligraphy, tea ceremony. These arts were not for self-expression, but to demonstrate composure and skill. To write a poem was to reveal grace. To serve tea was to show discipline. Everything, every motion, every word was a reflection of inner balance. Still, beneath the calm surface, many women carried quiet dreams. Some longed for freedom, for love, for even the smallest taste of autonomy. A few, those born with rare opportunity or unyielding will, defied these norms. They learned to read, to write, to think independently. In temples and hidden schools, Buddhist nuns sometimes taught young girls the basics of scripture and literacy. It was rare, but not impossible. And through it all, women formed networks of quiet solidarity. Mothers taught daughters how to survive, how to find strength and patience. They passed down stories of resilience and lessons of endurance, often whispered as lullabies. At night, when the household finally slept, a woman might sit alone for a moment, listening to the wind against the walls, watching the flicker of a lantern fade. Her world was small, yes, but within that smallness there was peace and purpose. Life in feudal Japan was never easy, but in every bow, every word unspoken, and every carefully folded kimono, there lived a quiet kind of strength, the kind that held an entire society together unseen. So now we are going to cover the legendary Japanese female samurai who defied expectations. The morning mist hangs low over the valley. The year is somewhere around 1180. Japan is divided, not by rivers or mountains, but by loyalty. Two powerful clans, the Taira and the Minamoto, are locked in a long and weary struggle for control of the empire. This conflict, known as the Genpei War, would last for nearly 5 years. It was a time of shifting alliances and uncertain honor, when men lived and died by their sword, and when every dawn might bring either peace or the echo of drums across the hills. In this world of soldiers and lords, of banners and steel, few would have imagined a woman on the battlefield. But history, when you look closely, is filled with quiet exceptions, and among the most remarkable was Tama Gozen. Her name drifts through the centuries like a faint echo, never loud, but unforgettable. She is mentioned in the Hike Monogatari, a great war chronicle written long after the battles had ended. Her story, though brief in the records, expands endlessly in imagination. Even now, historians debate which parts are true, which are myth, and which lies somewhere in between. But perhaps that uncertainty is part of her enduring beauty. Tama was said to be strong, graceful, and fearless. She rode and fought beside Minamoto no Yasunaka, a general known for both his brilliance and his pride. He trusted her not only for her skill in combat, but for her calm under pressure, a rare steadiness amid chaos. Imagine her as she prepares for battle, the faint scent of oiled leather, the slow tightening of armor cords across her shoulders, the rhythmic motion as she secures her hair beneath a simple helmet. Outside, men shout, horses snort, arrows rattle in their quivers, but her mind is still. Focused, steady, she carries a naginata, a long pole weapon with a curved blade, elegant, flexible, and lethal. It was favored by women of the samurai class because it allowed them to fight at a distance, to defend a home or a gate. But in Tamo's hands, it became more than a defensive tool. It was an extension of her will. When she moved, it sang softly through the air, a sound both graceful and final. To understand her story, you must understand the code she lived by, Bushido, the way of the Japanese warrior. It was a philosophy rooted in discipline, loyalty, and self-sacrifice. For a woman like Tamo, that code meant walking an even narrower path, to embody both strength and obedience, to wield a weapon and yet remain invisible in the eyes of men who wrote the chronicles. Every action was a balance between duty and silence. The chronicles tell us she rode in front of Yoshinaka's troops, her armor gleaming, her bow firm in her hands. When the signal was given, she charged ahead, fearless, leading men who were perhaps uneasy to follow a woman until they saw her fight. She would unseat her enemies one after another, not with wild fury, but with quiet precision. Each movement deliberate, each strike controlled. Her calmness, even in the storm of battle, made her unforgettable. But the Junpei War was not a tale of glory. It was a slow unraveling. Families torn apart, vassals betraying their lords. Entire provinces burned, rebuilt, and burned again. The landscape itself seemed weary of it all. Fields trampled, temples emptied, the air heavy with smoke. Tamo lived through it, following Yoshinaka as he rose and then began to fall from grace. Though once celebrated as a brilliant commander, Yoshinaka's pride made him reckless. The court in Kyoto began to distrust him, and soon his own kin turned against him. As winter crept across the land in 1184, Yoshinaka found himself cornered, his forces dwindling, his allies gone. In the cold light of dawn, snow dusted the armor of his remaining soldiers. Among them was Tamo. She rode beside him toward their final stand at the Battle of Owazu. The air was sharp and thin, each breath visible in the cold. The sound of hooves echoed across the frozen fields. When the enemy appeared, vast in number, banners fluttering, Yoshinaka ordered his few loyal fighters to charge. He knew it was hopeless, and yet they went. The chronicles say Tamo faced one of the strongest warriors among the enemy, Anda no Hachiro Morshig. He was said to tower above his men, armored head to toe. Tamo, smaller and more agile, met his challenge without hesitation. She dismounted, moved lightly across the snow, and with a single strike of her naginata brought him down. It was not triumph, it was inevitability. A gesture of loyalty, a promise kept. After that, the story fragments. Some say Yoshinaka, realizing defeat was certain, ordered her to leave. That he wanted her to survive, or perhaps he feared dying alongside a woman would tarnish his name. She resisted, but eventually obeyed. The chronicles describe her as reluctant, as if she looked back once before disappearing into the haze of snow and smoke. And then nothing certain. One version of the story of the female Japanese samurai says she continued fighting until the very end, cut down in battle beside her lord. Another claims she was captured but spared for her courage. Still another softer story tells that she fled into the mountains, removed her armor, and entered a Buddhist convent. There she lived out her remaining days in silence, tending to gardens and prayer stones, her sword buried beneath a flowering cherry tree. Imagine her in that quiet life. The clatter of war replaced by the gentle sound of water flowing through temple gardens. Her hands, once calloused from gripping a weapon, now folding prayer cloths or arranging blossoms before a small altar. In the mornings, she would walk barefoot on the cool stones, her breath visible in the early air. At dusk, she might sit beneath a tree, watching petals fall, remembering the rhythm of the battlefield, the echo of hooves, the rush of wind against her face. Did she find peace? No one knows. But perhaps in those silent years, she understood something the world of men had never quite grasped, that honor does not always require noise, and courage does not always demand a sword. Tamo's legend lived on, retold in songs, plays, and paintings for centuries. In some, she is fierce and untouchable, a warrior spirit who could not be subdued. In others, she is tragic, a ghostly figure haunted by loyalty and loss. Yet for every version, one truth remains. She existed in a world that tried to confine her, and still she found a way to carve her own path. Even now, her image endures, a lone rider crossing a misty field, her armor glinting faintly in the gray light. Somewhere in that endless horizon between history and dream, she still moves, steady and silent. The sound fades. The snow melts. And in the distance, we hear the soft pluck of a shamisen carrying us from the quiet of battle to the gentle hum of another world, the world of art, of song, and of painted faces waiting in the lantern glow. When you're ready, we'll open the door to that other side of life, to the Geisha districts, where silence was a language and every movement told a story. Now, we're going to explore the secrets of the Geisha district, art, performance, and quiet power behind painted smiles. Night falls slowly in Kyoto. The air cools, and a soft mist drifts through narrow wooden streets. A bell tolls from a distant temple, low and deep, its echo lingering like a sigh. Lanterns flicker to life one by one, glowing behind lattice windows, their warm light spilling across the cobblestones. This is the Hanamochi, the flower town, the district of the geisha. It is not loud here, not even on nights when music plays. Sound feels soft and somehow absorbed by wood and paper and night air. The scent of roasted chestnuts drifts from a vendor's cart. Somewhere nearby, water trickles gently into a stone basin. And if you listen closely, beneath the shuffle of sandals and the whisper of wind, you might hear the faint strum of a shamisen, 3 strings, 1 voice. This is a world built on quiet precision. Every gesture, every look, every pause carries meaning. Here, art is not a performance. It is a way of being. To become a geisha, or more accurately in Kyoto, a geiko, one begins as a child. A young girl, often from a poor or rural family, might be sent to live in an okiya, a geisha house. The okiya is both home and school, part dormitory, part sanctuary, part stage. At first, she is a shikomi, a servant apprentice. Her world is one of chores and observation. She rises before dawn to sweep tatami floors, to polish the wooden corridors until they gleam, to prepare the charcoal for the hearths that will warm the rooms later that night. She watches the older geisha as they prepare for their engagements, the slow layering of kimono, the delicate touch of a brush against a painted face, the measured way they speak. Every act becomes a lesson, every mistake a whisper of correction. When she has proven her diligence, she becomes a mako, an apprentice entertainer. The word mako means dancing child, though her dances will take years to perfect. Her training is exhaustive, not harsh, but constant. She studies Naihan Bayu, the traditional dance, its movements drawn from nature, waves, petals, falling snow. She learns the shamisen, the flute, the drum. Her posture is adjusted daily, her steps corrected. Even laughter is taught, a small, controlled sound, modest, yet melodic. Imagine her mornings, kneeling before a low mirror, hairpins scattered like tiny stars around her. A senior attendant winds her hair into the intricate wear-shinobu style, fastening it with silk cords and wooden combs. The process takes hours. If she moves too quickly during the day, a single ornament might slip, and she must return to begin again. Her kimono is bright and heavy, long sleeves trailing behind her as she walks, a symbol of youth. The obi, the wide sash at her waist, is tied in an elaborate knot that can weigh nearly 20 pounds. To move gracefully beneath such weight takes both strength and stillness. When she walks, the wooden sandals, okobo, make a distinct hollow sound against the stone. In the stillness of night, it echoes like a slow heartbeat. As dusk deepens, the tea houses, or oshaya, come alive. The lanterns outside bear the family crests of the geisha who work within. Small circles, plum blossoms, stylized waves. Their light glows faintly through silk paper, casting soft halos on the rain-damp street. Inside, everything is arranged in quiet symmetry. Tatami mats line the floor. The air smells faintly of sandalwood and sake. Low tables hold porcelain cups, small dishes of pickled radish, or persimmon slices. Every object has a place, and every place has a purpose. When the guests arrive, merchants, scholars, or sometimes traveling samurai, they remove their shoes and bow low. The geisha enter not hurriedly, but with deliberate grace. Their movements are unbroken, like flowing water. The silk of their kimono whispers softly as they kneel. Conversation begins, gentle, fluid, filled with practiced charm. Here the geisha's art is not to impress, but to soothe. She listens more than she speaks, responding with wit, but never sharpness. Her laughter is quiet, sincere, but controlled. She plays the shamisen, its tone both crisp and melancholy. Sometimes she dances, her sleeves drifting like clouds, her fan unfolding to mimic a petal, a wave, a breeze. Each movement tells a story older than the city itself. For the men who come here, this is escape, not from morality, but from the noise of the outside world. In the geisha's company, time slows. Tea is poured, stories are told. The world beyond the paper walls seems to fade. But behind the performance lies a life far more structured than free. Geisha are often romanticized, but their existence was, and still is, governed by discipline and debt. Every kimono, every lesson, every ornament was provided by the okiya and repaid through years of work. A geisha's reputation was her currency, her grace, her survival. A single scandal, a guest complaint, a rumor, could end a career. Yet within these constraints, many geisha found ways to express subtle power. They managed their own schedules, built networks of loyal patrons, and cultivated artistry that gave them quiet authority. Unlike many women of their time, they could earn money, own property, and live independently within their profession. In a world that prized obedience, this was a small revolution lived out in silence and silk. Between engagements, a geisha might return to her room at the okiya. There, she would sit before a small lamp, writing haiku in delicate script, poems about rain, or cranes, or moonlight. She might hum softly as she cleaned her instruments. Outside, the rain would fall steadily, the city lights shimmering on wet rooftops. Even in solitude, her life was performance, not in falsehood, but in beauty. Some women chose the life willingly, drawn by its art and independence. Others had no choice. But all who remained long enough to become full geisha shared one truth. They belonged to a world that lived between illusion and reality. They were both admired and misunderstood, revered as symbols of refinement, yet often pitied as captives of their own perfection. Their art depended on illusion. They created moments that were beautiful precisely because they could not last. A song fading at dawn, a cherry blossom falling into a teacup, a smile offered and then gone. Their entire world was built around impermanence, and perhaps that is why their beauty endures. When the final guest departs and the laughter fades, the geisha returns home. She removes the heavy obi, the hair ornaments, the layers of silk. Her skin bears the faint marks of fabric and weight. The mirror reflects a face no longer painted, pale, tired, human. She cleanses the white rice powder from her cheeks, wipes away the red from her lips, and ties her hair loosely before bed. The silence of her small room feels different from the silence of the tea house, more honest, more personal. Outside, the lanterns are being extinguished one by one. The streets are nearly empty now, save for the faint sound of wooden sandals on stone. Somewhere, water drips rhythmically from a rooftop. She lies down on her futon, pulling a thin blanket to her chin. The scent of incense lingers faintly in her hair. Her breathing slows. In the distance, a temple bell tolls midnight. Perhaps in her dreams, she walks again through the lantern-lit streets, not as a performer, not as a symbol, but simply as herself beneath a pale spring moon. And when dawn comes, she will rise once more, to paint her face, to rehearse her smile, and to step quietly into a world that demands grace from dawn to dusk. A world where every glance, every note of music, every sip of tea was not just entertainment, but art itself. When you're ready, we'll step beyond the lantern glow and into another world of structure and silence. The inner chambers of the shogun's palace, where grace became duty and elegance became power. Now we're going to relax and explore the inside the shogun's palace, the rituals, gardens, and hierarchy of Edo's elite. Imagine the heart of Edo in the early 1700s, what is now Tokyo. The city hums faintly beyond the walls, but within the shogun's palace there is only stillness. Dawn begins in silence. A pale light filters through the paper screens of the great residence. From the inner courtyard, a single pine tree sways in the morning air, its needles glistening with dew. Somewhere deep inside, a bell chimes once, soft and low, to signal the start of the day. This is the home of the Tokugawa shoguns, rulers of Japan for over 250 years. It is not a palace of glitter and noise like Versailles or Beijing's Forbidden City. The grandeur here is quiet, polished wood, smooth stones, symmetry, and light. Power moves softly through its corridors, whispered rather than declared. The palace was a city within a city, miles of corridors, chambers, and gardens. Each hall was connected by long wooden walkways that glowed like amber when sunlight touched them. The walls were sliding doors made of rice paper and wood, painted with delicate gold leaf cranes or pine trees. To walk these corridors was to enter a dream of order and restraint. Even the floors were polished so finely that one could see faint reflections in them, a reminder to tread carefully, to move with intention. In every direction, there were barriers, not just of wood and paper, but of rank. Only certain people could cross from one space to another. Each door was a boundary between worlds, the outer rooms for samurai retainers, the inner chambers for nobles, and at the very heart of it all, the secluded world of women, the joku or great interior. Few men ever saw this hidden domain. It was the women's world, a place of quiet routines and invisible influence. Here lived the shogun's wife, his concubines, attendants, and hundreds of servants who tended to their needs. Some had been born into noble families. Others had been chosen from across the provinces for their beauty, skill, or poise. To the outside world, they were envied, women surrounded by luxury, protected by walls of cedar and stone. But in truth, life in the joku was one of isolation. Once a woman entered, she almost never left again. Her days would pass entirely within those walls. Each morning began before sunrise. The attendants would rise from their futons and slide open the paper screens to let in the faint gray light. They moved quietly, speaking in whispers. The first task was cleansing, washing the hands, face, and mouth with cool water poured from ceramic basins. Then came dressing, layer upon layer of silk, each robe folded precisely, the colors chosen according to rank and season. A mistaken dress, too bold, too plain, too soon, could bring quiet humiliation. The air was always faintly perfumed with incense. Sometimes it was kiara, a rare, sweet agar wood used only in the shogun's residence. Sometimes it was sandalwood, cool and meditative. The scent drifted through the corridors like invisible music, signaling that the day had begun. Breakfast was simple, a bowl of rice, miso soup, perhaps a piece of grilled fish. Servants carried lacquered trays from room to room, each tray identical. Meals were eaten in near silence. Only the soft click of chopsticks broke the stillness. It was not a place for conversation or laughter, not during meals, not during ceremonies, not unless permission was given. Beyond the routine of daily life, the women of the Joku lived according to ritual. They bowed when the shogun passed, though many might never see him directly. They addressed each other by formal titles, never personal names. Letters were read aloud before being delivered. Gifts were inspected and recorded. At the top of this intricate hierarchy was the Midai Dokoro, the shogun's official wife. Below her were favored concubines, then attendants, and finally the lowest-ranking maids who scrubbed floors and prepared baths. Each rank had its privileges and dangers. A single misstep, a wrong word, a rumor of disobedience could end a woman standing overnight. But while the rules were strict, influence thrived in quiet ways. The shogun's wife or mother often held great sway behind the scenes. She could recommend appointments, promote or demote attendants, and shape alliances between noble families. Power here was not loud. It flowed like water beneath a layer of ice, unseen but steady. Outside the women's quarters stretched vast gardens. Raked gravel paths wound between moss-covered stones. Ponds mirrored the sky so perfectly that it was easy to forget which was reflection and which was real. Bridges arched gracefully over koi ponds, their red railings fading with time and weather. Each tree was placed deliberately, pines for longevity, plum trees for perseverance, bamboo for strength. It was said that walking through the gardens was a meditation in itself, a way to remember balance in a world of confinement. The women would stroll there in pairs, their sleeves brushing against one another as they moved. They would feed the fish, scatter petals across the water, or simply sit by the pavilion and listen to the breeze moving through reeds. In winter, snow would blanket the stones, muffling every sound. In spring, the air filled with the scent of cherry blossoms drifting down like soft pink rain. The gardens were their only glimpse of freedom, and yet, even that freedom was framed by walls. Within the Joku, the women were encouraged to cultivate refinement. They practiced calligraphy, their brushes gliding smoothly across rice paper. They studied poetry, reading verses from the tale of Genji and composing their own in delicate ink. They performed the tea ceremony, where every movement, lifting the kettle, whisking the tea, bowing to the guests, was part of a larger choreography of respect. They arranged flowers according to the principles of ikebana, balancing color, space, and emptiness. These were not hobbies. They were acts of self-control, a quiet resistance to monotony. Art in the palace was the only freedom allowed. In the evenings, candles glowed behind silk screens. Women gathered to play the koto, a long-stringed instrument that filled the halls with gentle, echoing notes. The sound lingered even after the last string was plucked, fading slowly into the night like breath. Some women painted landscapes from memory, the villages they had left behind, the mountains they would never see again. Their art was their escape, their rebellion, and their solace. Years passed differently inside the palace. There were no seasons of harvest or travel, no festivals beyond the inner walls. Time was marked by the changing fabrics of their robes and the flowers arranged in the corridors. When a new shogun came to power, the order of women changed too. Some rose in rank. Others were quietly dismissed, sent to temples to live out their days in prayer. The Joku became its own universe, sustained by rumor, hierarchy, and memory. Generations of women were born, lived, and died within its walls, their names recorded neatly in ledgers, but rarely spoken aloud again. Outside, the world was changing. Merchants prospered, cities grew, and Western ships appeared on the horizon. But inside the palace, time remained still. As darkness fell, the corridors filled with the faint glow of oil lamps. Guards walked their rounds, their wooden clappers echoing softly to mark the hours. The women withdrew to their chambers. Some prayed before small altars, offering incense to the ancestors. Some wrote letters that would never be sent. Others simply sat by the window, gazing at the pale light of the moon reflected on the pond below. The palace slept lightly. Silence ruled once more, deep, layered, and absolute. It was a silence that carried both peace and longing. Imagine lying there on a futon of silk, listening to the night, the faint crackle of the lantern wick, the sigh of the wind across the garden, the murmur of your own heartbeat in the dark. In that moment, the world outside no longer exists, only this enclosed realm of quiet beauty and invisible rules. And so, life in the shogun's palace continued, a world of formality and restraint, where grace was both a performance and a survival skill. To live here was to master stillness, to breathe carefully, to find meaning in repetition. And yet, within that silence, there were countless untold stories, moments of rebellion, of compassion, of humanity hidden behind the mask of ritual. Soft temple bells sound faintly, the echo fades into wind. After researching the women of feudal Japan, the peasants, the warriors, the artists, and the nobles, I found myself drawn even deeper. Their stories are fragments of a larger tapestry, each thread woven with discipline, beauty, and quiet strength. And so I decided to explore 2 more stories, intimate portraits of Japanese women from history whose lives reveal what it truly meant to endure, to adapt, and to find peace in a world bound by duty. Now we're about to talk about Lady Kasuga, the woman who ruled from the shadows. Imagine once again the long, polished corridors of Edo Castle. The air is still. A faint trace of incense lingers from the morning ceremony. Servants move silently through the halls, their footsteps muffled by tatami mats. In the innermost chambers, where only whispers of power are heard, a woman sits in quiet thought. Her name is Kasuga no Tsubon, though she was born Maru. In 1579, history remembers her by her title, Lady Kasuga, the woman who shaped the Tokugawa court, defined its rituals, and quietly ruled behind the shogun's screen. If the shogun's palace was a theater of order and grace, then Lady Kasuga was its unseen director. She never carried a sword or commanded an army, yet her influence reached further than most generals. She was the architect of stillness, the one who decided how silence should sound. To understand her life, imagine Japan at the dawn of the Edo period. The wars had ended. After centuries of chaos, the nation was finally unified under the Tokugawa shogunate. Peace, though welcome, required control, a delicate balance between strength and ceremony. And within that new world, women's roles were carefully defined. Kasuga entered service in an age where a woman's influence was supposed to be invisible, but she possessed a mind sharper than the swords carried by the men who surrounded her. Born to a samurai family, she was educated, unusually so for a woman of her time. She studied poetry, calligraphy, and the etiquette of court life. When she married a mid-level retainer, she seemed destined for an ordinary life, quiet, proper, forgettable. But fate often finds its way through the smallest door. Her husband died young, widowed and childless. Kasuga entered the service of the Tokugawa family, first as a lady-in-waiting, then as a nurse to the young heir, Emitsu Tokugawa, who would one day become the 3rd shogun. That single decision to enter the palace changed not only her life, but the entire history of the shogunate. The palace was a maze of etiquette and hidden alliances. Every word mattered. Every bow, every glance carried weight. And into this world stepped Lady Kasuga, observant, calm, deliberate. Her voice was low, her tone never hurried. She cared for the young Emitsu as both mother and teacher. He was frail, shy, and uncertain of himself, a boy overshadowed by his younger brother, who was favored by their father. It was Kasuga who protected him, guided him, and instilled in him the quiet discipline that would define his reign. Each morning, she would ensure his robes were perfectly arranged, his gestures correct, his lessons recited without error. She taught him not only how to speak, but when to remain silent. In a world ruled by restraint, that lesson was perhaps the most powerful of all. Over time, her calm influence shaped him deeply. When Amitsu ascended to the position of shogun, it was Lady Kasuga who stood just behind the throne, unseen but essential. She became his trusted advisor, his moral compass, and the guardian of the palace's most sacred order. The system of the Joku, the great interior, owes its creation to her. At the time, the shogun's residence was filled with retainers, servants and attendants, many of whom lived with little organization. Lady Kasuga saw the need for structure for a world where the shogun's household, particularly his female attendants, could be managed with order and grace. So she built it. Under her supervision, the Joku became an institution unlike any other in Japan. It housed hundreds of women, wives, concubines, attendants, seamstresses, musicians, and servants, all governed by a strict hierarchy that Kasuga herself designed. Every role had a rank. Every rank had a rule. It was a masterpiece of order and subtlety, an empire of silence, hidden within the larger empire of men. To the outside world, the Joku was a mystery. To those within, it was Lady Kasuga's creation, a world that reflected her precision, her intellect, and her unyielding sense of discipline. She was both protector and warden, teacher and judge. Her word carried the weight of law inside the women's palace. And yet, she rarely raised her voice. Power to her was something best expressed quietly, through design, through presence, through control of the smallest details. Imagine a morning within the Joku during Lady Kasuga's rule. The sun has just risen over Edo. The corridors are washed in pale gold light. The air is still cool from the night. Servants kneel outside her chamber, awaiting her orders. Scrolls are unfurled, names read, duties assigned. Every woman in the palace knows her place, who bows to whom, who speaks first, who remains silent. Even the distance one must walk behind another is measured by status. Kasuga observes everything. She moves through the corridors slowly, her robes trailing softly behind her face serene but unreadable. She inspects the kitchens, the storerooms, the gardens. She pauses to offer quiet correction, a misplaced vase, a wrinkled collar, a word spoken too quickly. To be under her gaze was to be reminded that perfection was possible and expected. At midday, she takes tea alone. The room is sparsely decorated, a scroll, a single flower in a vase, a window framing the garden beyond. Her tea movements are slow and deliberate. Every sound, the pour of water, the soft clink of ceramic, fills the space like music. In the afternoon, she meets with officials from the outer court. They bow deeply, careful with every word. Though she holds no official title of state, all understand her influence. When she speaks, it is in measured phrases, never commands, always suggestions. But those suggestions shape policy, affect appointments, and determine who will rise or fall within the shogunate's inner circle. Lady Kasuga's strength came from her restraint. She was loyal beyond question, but never sentimental. When rules were broken, she acted decisively. Records describe her as unyielding, not cruel, but firm, a woman who believed that peace could only be preserved through discipline. It was said that, when conflicts arose among the women of the Joku, she resolved them swiftly, often with quiet mediation. If a punishment was required, it was delivered without spectacle. There were no shouts, no drama, just silence, and the finality of a decision. To her attendants, she was both revered and feared. They described her as a woman of calm eyes, capable of reading truth even in silence. She remembered every face, every name, every mistake. And yet, she was also capable of deep kindness, arranging marriages, promoting talent, ensuring that even the lowest servant had food and dignity. Her leadership was a mirror of her philosophy. Order brings peace, restraint brings strength, and silence, when used wisely, can speak louder than any voice. Beyond the palace walls, Lady Kasuga played an even greater role. She served as the bridge between the shogunate and the imperial court in Kyoto. In 1629, when political tensions threatened to divide the country, it was Kasuga who negotiated a peaceful resolution. She traveled to Kyoto herself, a rare act for a woman of her position, and met with the Empress Dowager, securing the Tokugawa family's standing and ensuring lasting peace. Imagine that journey. Her palanquin moving slowly through the mountain passes, escorted by guards, followed by attendants. Villagers bowing as she passed, unaware that the woman within held the stability of Japan in her calm hands. When she reached the imperial palace, she knelt before the throne with perfect composure, her words measured, her tone respectful but firm. It was said the Empress herself admired her intelligence. Few women in Japanese history had ever wielded such influence so quietly. She never sought power for herself, only for the order she believed the Tokugawa family could bring. As the years passed, her hair silvered, but her resolve remained steady. She continued to serve the shogunate into her 60s, guiding the palace with the same composure that had defined her youth. When she finally died in 1643, she left behind not only the joku, but an entire system of governance that would endure for centuries. The Tokugawa peace, a time when Japan closed its borders and cultivated art, architecture, and tradition, bore her imprint in every quiet corner of the palace. The gardens she designed continued to bloom. The rituals she established continued to be practiced. And the silence she valued continued to define Japanese court life long after her death. Today, her name is not widely known beyond Japan. Yet every story of the joku, every tale of refined court life in Edo Castle, carries her shadow. She taught an empire how to balance grace with control, how to rule without noise. If you visit Edo Castle's ruins today, you might still feel her presence. The stones are cool underfoot. The air is heavy with history. The pine trees she once walked beneath still stand tall, whispering softly in the wind. Close your eyes and imagine her there, a figure in layered silk, standing at the edge of the pond, watching the koi ripple the water's surface. Behind her lies the great palace. Before her, the reflection of the sky. A life lived in stillness, yet filled with movement. A woman who shaped an age without ever stepping beyond its boundaries. The faint sound of wind through trees fades into distant temple bells. The more I learned about Lady Kasuga, the more I realized that her world, the world of the Edo Palace, was only one side of Japan's story. For centuries before her, another kind of woman shaped culture, not through governance or discipline, but through words, poetry, beauty, and longing. In the next chapter, we travel backward in time to the Heian period, to the story of Ono no Komachi, a poet whose verses about love and impermanence still echo through 1,000 years of silence. We are now going to transition to Ono Komachi, the poet who loved and vanished. Imagine a city of quiet lakes and winding canals. A city where the air smells of plum blossoms and ink. It is Kyoto, though in Komachi's time, it was known as Heian, the capital of peace and tranquility. The year is somewhere around 850 AD. The morning sky glows soft and gray, and the sound of temple bells rolls across the city like distant thunder. Wooden mansions line the narrow streets, their verandas open to the gardens beyond. Inside, courtiers in flowing robes murmur softly as they compose letters or brush poems onto delicate paper. This was the world of the Heian period, an age of refinement and art. Warriors had not yet risen. Politics were gentle and slow, conducted through poetry and symbolism. Beauty itself was considered a form of wisdom. And within this serene world lived a woman whose words would outlast empires, Ono no Komachi. No one knows exactly when she was born, or even where. Some say she came from the north, from the province of Dua. Others believe she was born near the capital, the daughter of a minor official. History offers little certainty, but poetry offers glimpses. She was said to be beautiful beyond description, her skin pale as snow, her hair long and dark, falling like silk past her knees. But what made her truly remarkable was not her face, but her mind. From an early age, she showed a gift for words. She could take the briefest image, the sound of rain, the sight of a fading flower, and turn it into something eternal. By her 20s, she had entered the imperial court as a lady-in-waiting, serving the empress and writing verses that captured hearts and silenced rooms. Her poetry was unlike anyone else's, where others wrote about beauty and nature. Komachi wrote about feeling, longing, love, loss, and the passing of time. Her voice was not gentle or detached, but deeply human. It was said that even men trembled when they read her words, because they revealed emotions most had never dared to speak aloud. The Heian court was a world where writing a single perfect poem could change one's fate. Courtship was conducted through verse. When a nobleman wished to express affection, he would send a short poem written on folded paper, accompanied by a sprig of flowers or a painted fan. If the woman replied with equal grace, in tone, rhythm, and imagery, the relationship might continue. If not, it would end as quietly as it began. Komachi played this game better than anyone. Her replies were sharp, poetic, and mesmerizing. She had the rare ability to weave emotion into the structure of form, 5 lines, 31 syllables, and the weight of a lifetime inside them. One of her most famous poems reads, "Color of the flower has already faded away, while in idle thoughts my life passes vainly by, as I watch the long rains fall." Even in translation, the sadness lingers, the awareness of impermanence, the quiet ache of beauty fading. She wrote as though she could already see her own life vanishing with the petals. Many stories grew around her name, stories of the men who courted her, and the hearts she broke without meaning to. One tells of a nobleman who pursued her tirelessly, sending poem after poem for 100 nights. On the final night, he arrived at her door, drenched from rain, exhausted but hopeful. But Komachi, testing his devotion, asked him to return once more. He did, and collapsed in the snow before reaching her gate, dying before dawn. The story may be myth, but it captures the aura that surrounded her. A woman of beauty so powerful it could kill, yet never save her from loneliness. Another legend says she loved a man named Arawara no Narihira, himself a celebrated poet and courtier. Their verses to each other were said to glow with passion, but love in the Heian court was fleeting, ruled by decorum, secrecy, and time. Even the deepest connection could dissolve like mist by morning. If they truly loved each other, their affair ended quietly, leaving only poems behind. And perhaps that is why her verses speak so vividly of longing, love never fulfilled, always remembered, always just beyond reach. As years passed, Komachi's beauty faded, as all beauty must. The court that once adored her found new faces to praise. But she continued to write, not for admiration, but for herself. Her later poems became quieter and more introspective, filled with images of loneliness and impermanence. The dew of the morning vanishes when the sun comes. So too do our lives fade into the emptiness of all we once loved. She withdrew from the court and lived simply, perhaps as a recluse or a nun. No one knows exactly where she went. Some say she retired to a small house near a temple outside Kyoto, living among bamboo and moss. Others claim she wandered the countryside, teaching poetry to village girls. Imagine her in that solitude. A thatched roof above her, a paper lantern flickering beside her mat. Outside, the night hums with crickets. She dips her brush in ink and writes slowly, the faint scratching sound blending with the wind. Each word is a prayer, not for love or fame, but for clarity. In her isolation, she seemed to find a kind of peace, the quiet acceptance that everything she once was would soon dissolve into memory. Centuries later, storytellers began to imagine her final days. In their tales, she appears as an old woman, frail and wandering, her beauty long gone. She sits by the roadside, her hair white, her kimono tattered. Travelers pass and whisper, "That is Komachi, the woman who was once the most beautiful in all of Japan." In some versions, she laughs softly, in others, she weeps. But always she speaks of impermanence, of how beauty fades, how love dies, how even words, though immortal, cannot hold back time, and yet, perhaps they can. For though her body vanished into legend, her words did not. 1,000 years later, her poems still breathe, quiet and sad, but alive. Komachi's poetry reflects a concept central to Japanese thought, mujur, the impermanence of all things. To her, beauty was never meant to last. It existed precisely because it faded. The falling blossom was more beautiful than the one still attached to the branch because it carried within it the truth of time. This understanding gave her work its haunting tone, not despair, but acceptance. To read her verses is to sit quietly beside her and feel the slow passing of the seasons. She once wrote, "Did the flower of the heart bloom for long? No, it scattered soon, leaving only faint perfume lingering in the empty air." There is calm in her sadness, as though she were watching life unfold from a distance, not fighting its transience, but embracing it. In the Heian world, women like Komachi lived half in shadow. Their faces were hidden behind fans. Their words were veiled in poetry. Yet through that subtlety, they expressed profound truth. Writing was their voice, their power, their legacy. Through the exchange of poems, they shaped love affairs, reputations, even politics. A single perfect verse could elevate a family. A careless one could bring disgrace. Komachi's mastery of this art gave her an authority rare for her time. Even men who held political office deferred to her poetic skill. And as the centuries passed, she became more than a woman. She became a symbol of beauty, impermanence, and the fleeting nature of human life. Long after her death, her image appeared in scroll paintings and no theater plays. In one famous performance, she sits alone in the moonlight, remembering her lost lovers. As the chorus chants her poems, her younger self appears before her, a vision of beauty long gone. The two figures, old and young, mirror each other in silence until dawn breaks and the vision fades. Even the monks who copied her poems by hand centuries later described feeling her presence, as though her spirit still lingered in the ink. Today, her name is still known throughout Japan. School children learn her verses. Temples in Akita and Kyoto claim to house her remains. Each spring, when the cherry blossoms bloom and fall, visitors leave poems written on slips of paper at shrines dedicated to her memory. It is as if the land itself still whispers her name. Ono no Komachi's story is not a tragedy, though it often sounds like one. It is a reminder that the things we fear losing, beauty, love, youth, were never meant to stay. Their fading is what makes them precious. She turned that truth into art. In the stillness of her words, there is peace. A peace that comes from letting go. If you listen closely, you might hear her voice in the world around you, in the sound of rain against your window, in the soft fall of petals on the ground, in the hush that follows the turning of a page. She has been gone for 1,000 years, and yet she remains. In every poem that speaks of love, in every sigh that lingers after goodbye. And so we leave the poet behind, sitting by her lantern, her brush in hand, her ink drying as the night deepens. The rain outside has stopped. The garden glistens faintly under moonlight. Her final words are written. She places the brush down, closes her eyes, and listens to the stillness she helped create. After exploring Komachi, S-World, where poetry and emotion ruled instead of swords, we return once more to an age of power and conflict. There was another woman who carried both strength and serenity, discipline and compassion. A woman who lived centuries after Komochi, and yet shared her ability to shape history from behind temple walls. Her name was Hoji Misako, the woman who became known as the Nun Shogun, a warrior's widow who turned to faith and leadership, guiding Japan through one of its most uncertain times. Now we are entering our final story, where we will talk about Hoji Misako, the Nun Shogun. The dawn mist rises slowly over Kamakura, the early seat of Japan's samurai government. It is the late 12th century. The sea air drifts through narrow streets, carrying the faint scent of salt and pine. In the distance, the sound of monks chanting echoes faintly through the valley, a slow rhythm of faith woven into the hum of a growing city. Here, among stone temples and wooden houses, stands a woman whose name still carries quiet power, Hoji Misako. Born into a world of warriors, she would become one of the most influential women in Japanese history, the wife of a shogun, the mother of two more, and, in time, a nun who ruled the nation from behind temple walls. They called her Ama Shogun, the Nun Shogun, a woman of discipline and restraint who guided Japan through grief, betrayal, and change. Misako was born in 1156, the daughter of a provincial samurai family in Izu province. Her father, Hajitokimasa, was a man of ambition and strategy, traits his daughter would inherit. She grew up in a household where politics were whispered over evening meals and where the sound of training swords filled the mornings. Unlike the noble women of Kyoto, Misako's life was not one of poems and perfumes. She learned to ride, to manage estates, to think strategically. The Hosh family was powerful, but still subordinate to the Taira clan, the rulers of Japan at the time. Everything changed when a young exile named Minamoto no Yoritomo was sent to live in Izu under her father's supervision. Yoritomo had been banished after his clan's defeat in civil war. He was quiet, cautious, and burdened by memory. Misako met him when she was still young, and the story that began between them would alter the entire course of Japanese history. The daughter of his jailer and the exiled heir of a fallen clan were not supposed to meet, but somehow they did. Their bond began in secrecy, letters exchanged under cover of night, quiet glances shared in gardens and corridors. In an era when love could destroy families, theirs was both tender and dangerous. When her father discovered the affair, he was furious, but Misako refused to abandon Yoritomo. Her defiance shocked everyone. For a samurai woman to follow her heart was unheard of. Yet she did, slipping away from her family's estate to join the man she loved. When the Minamoto clan rose again to challenge the Taira, Misako stood by Yoritomo's side. Their union united powerful families, and their love became political as well as personal. It was not a love of poetry and fans, but of endurance. Two people bound by shared ambition, surviving through strategy and patience. In 1185, after years of war, the Minamoto defeated the Taira. Yoritomo became Japan's first shogun, the military ruler who held real power while the emperor remained a ceremonial figure. His new government was based not in Kyoto's refined palaces, but here, in Kamakura, close to the sea, where samurai life was disciplined and austere. Misako, now his wife, took her place beside him, not as a decoration, but as a partner in leadership. She managed his household, advised him on political alliances, and worked to maintain unity among the fractious samurai lords who served him. Her intelligence and calm presence balanced his ambition. Where he was bold and often ruthless, she was thoughtful, deliberate, and strategic. The Kamakura court was simpler than the imperial one, but it was still a place of ritual. Misako oversaw ceremonies, received emissaries, and coordinated the complex web of relationships between samurai families. Her role required subtlety. She could not issue commands directly, but her influence was unmistakable. The peace, like all things, was temporary. In 1199, Yoritomo died suddenly, thrown from his horse while inspecting his lands. The entire court plunged into uncertainty. Without his authority, the delicate balance he had built began to tremble. Masako was 43 years old. Widowed, surrounded by men eager to claim power, she made a choice that stunned her peers. She cut her hair, donned the robes of a Buddhist nun, and took vows at a nearby temple. To the public, it was an act of mourning and humility. In truth, it was something far more deliberate. By removing herself from the role of wife, she freed herself to become something greater, a spiritual figure who could influence politics without appearing to do so. Her retreat into religion became her strongest shield. From her temple residence, Masako quietly assumed control. She guided her sons, first Yori, then Sanetomo, as they each ascended to the position of shogun. But youth and politics are perilous companions. Yori, her eldest, grew proud and reckless, clashing with his grandfather and uncles in the Hojin Plain. Tensions rose, factions formed. When whispers of betrayal spread through the court, Masako intervened. Her heart must have broken, but she did what she believed necessary to preserve peace. Yori was removed from power and later killed. Masako wept in private but showed no weakness in public. Her devotion was no longer to one man or even to her family, but to the fragile stability of the country her husband had built. Her second son, Sanetomo, became shogun next. He was gentle, artistic, more poet than warrior. Masako loved him deeply, but feared for him constantly. She surrounded him with loyal advisors, guarded him carefully, and continued to act as the real voice behind the shogunate. But fate would strike again. In 1219, Sanetomo was assassinated by his own nephew on the steps of the great shrine in Kamakura, a shocking end that echoed through the land. Masako, now both widow and mother to two murdered sons, could have withdrawn completely from the world. Instead, she remained. She guided the Council of Elders, mediated disputes, and became a living symbol of endurance. In her later years, Masako lived within the temple precincts of Kamakura, a short walk from the sea. The sound of waves became her constant companion. She wore the simple robes of a nun, ate frugally, and followed the rituals of Buddhist devotion. Each morning, she would rise before dawn to light incense at the altar. The scent of sandalwood drifted through the air as she bowed 3 times and recited sutras in a calm, even voice. She had lost her family, her title, her youth, but not her purpose. When political turmoil erupted between the imperial court and the shogunate, Masako once again stepped forward. She met with generals, negotiated with monks, and studied the government through words rather than war. Her authority came not from weapons, but from respect. Even the most powerful men bowed their heads when she entered the room. In one famous meeting, as her advisors argued about rebellion, she spoke quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "If we abandon discipline, the peace we built will crumble like sand. Let us stand firm, not for glory, but for the generations to come." Her words silenced the chamber. That moment alone may have saved the shogunate from collapse. Behind the calm surface, Masako carried immense sorrow. She had loved deeply, lost repeatedly, and lived to see the fragile impermanence of every victory. Yet she never allowed grief to harden her. Instead, she transformed it into wisdom. She spent her final years reading Buddhist texts, writing poetry, and advising young women who came to the temple seeking guidance. They described her as gentle but resolute, her eyes calm, her speech deliberate, her presence steady as the tide. One of her favorite scriptures was the Lotus Sutra, which teaches that enlightenment can be found through endurance and compassion. She would read its lines aloud to her attendants at sunset, her voice blending with the rustle of wind through the pine trees. All things are transient. The wise understand this, and in their understanding, they find peace. To Masako, those words were not philosophy, they were truth. In the summer of 1225, Misako fell ill. The air in Kamakura was heavy with humidity, the cries of cicadas filling the night. Monks tended to her, chanting softly in her chamber. She was 70 years old, a remarkable age for her time. As she grew weaker, she asked to be moved to a room facing the sea. She wanted to hear the waves one last time. There, surrounded by her attendants and the scent of incense, she spoke her final words, simple, reflective, and characteristic of her life. Everything passes, but what we build in stillness endures. She closed her eyes and drifted into silence. The nun shogun had finally laid down her burdens. After her death, the Hoji family continued to rule Japan for over a century. They maintained her system of governance, one built on consensus, restraint, and loyalty. Under her influence, Kamakura became not just a political capital, but a spiritual one. Temples flourished. Monks and poets traveled from across the islands to meditate by the sea she loved. And though time eventually eroded the buildings, her presence remained. Today, in Kamakura, a temple called Jufukuji stands near the site where she once prayed. Its gates are simple, shaded by ancient trees. If you walk there at dawn, the moss is still cool underfoot, and the air still smells faintly of the sea. The same wind that carried her prayers centuries ago moves gently through the pines. Visitors leave offerings, small stones, flowers, paper cranes, at the foot of her memorial. No grand statue, no gilded shrine, just quiet reverence. Her story is still told to this day, not as a tale of conquest, but of balance, of how strength can exist in silence, and how leadership can come from compassion rather than control. When you think of Hoshi Misako, you might imagine her as she was in youth, standing beside Yoritomo, her robes fluttering in the sea breeze, her gaze steady as she looks toward the future. Or perhaps you see her as an elder nun, seated before a low altar, the candlelight flickering across her lined face, her hands folded in prayer. Both are true. Both are her. She lived through war and peace, through love and loss, through the rise and fall of those she cherished. And through it all, she remained constant, like the sea itself, calm above, endless beneath. Even now, when the waves break gently along the shore of Kamakura, it feels as though they are whispering her name, a reminder that there are many ways to rule, and that sometimes the quietest among us leave the deepest marks. From Lady Kasuga's ordered court to Komachi's poetry to Misako's quiet power, the women of Japan's past reveal the same truth, that strength need not shout, that beauty can endure through silence, and that peace often belongs to those who have known sorrow. After finishing this research, I felt compelled to explore even more stories, women who shaped history in ways the world seldom remembers. And so, in the next video, we'll journey further into the forgotten corners of time, to uncover new voices that once whispered and now finally can be heard. The night has grown quiet. The candles have burned low, and the stories of these women, of Kasuga, Komachi, and Misako, linger softly in the stillness. They lived in different centuries, walked through different worlds, and yet their voices share the same rhythm, one of patience, endurance, and quiet strength. Through discipline and art, through loss and faith, they shaped Japan in ways history could not forget, even if the world sometimes did. And as their stories fade into silence, perhaps you can feel the thread that connects them, a calm, unbroken line weaving through time, from temple halls to lantern-lit streets, from ink-stained poems to the sound of the sea. The past never truly sleeps. It simply waits patiently for someone to listen. In the coming nights, we'll travel beyond Japan, across oceans and centuries, to explore the stories of women from other lands, from the kingdoms and deserts of Africa to the castles and courts of Europe. We'll listen for the same quiet heartbeat of history, steady, enduring, and human. So for now, close your eyes, Let the world grow soft around you. The voices of the past are at peace, and soon so are you. The night is long, the story's endless, and somewhere beyond the horizon, another history is waiting to be told. Good night, and may history keep you company.